session for today is called The Future State of Payments. How do we get there? We have quite an esteemed group of panelists today. Before we get started, first, my name is Mike Carlo. I am with a company called XanderPay and proudly serving on the board of directors of HEDNA for a bit, and along with Sandra, who you'll meet in a moment. She and I work through a bunch of the payment working groups and liaise with the various working group co-chairs. A little bit of discussion about today's session. The purpose is to talk about a number of different topics, but really focused on implementation of the work of the HEDNA working groups over the past couple of years. This is the first of 3 webinars. This one today, there'll be one in September on the 14th, and then another in mid-November. The goal of this webinar series is to keep current specific payment issues in the hotel sector in the forefront of discussion. We are proud to have with us Eric Lurch from Adyen. Adyen is our 2021 and also was our 2020 and I think maybe 2019, but I can't remember that far back, payment sponsor for the year. So Adyen helps us with designing this webinar series. They help us with a number of different content options over the course of the year. We do have, as you may have heard, we have an in-person conference planned for October, I think the 11th to the 13th in Miami. That is definitely going forward. We have a number of payment sessions that have been incorporated into the agenda there. We'll have working group meetings, and I think when everyone starts to get back from a long deserved summer holiday, we will get started with some working group meetings and focus on meeting up in Miami in October. Just before I introduce our panelists, really want to let you know that we'd like for this to be as interactive as possible within the constructs of Zoom webinars. We have Q&A options at the bottom of the screen, which you are more than welcome to ask questions. We will make sure that they're answered by our panelists. And there's also a chat functionality if something isn't working or you need something during the session, that will go to our panelists and our head of tech support. With that, I would like to introduce our panelists. As I mentioned, we have Eric Lurch from Adyen, Sandra Sari from Hyatt Hotels and Resorts, and Xavi Ginesta from the Voxel Group. I have asked each of the panelists to introduce themselves and what their roles are within their companies, and then we'll start talking about payments. With that, let's go to Eric first, then Sandra, and then Xavi, please.
Thanks, Mike. Nice to be on this webinar today. I'm at Adyen. I manage all of our network relationships for some of the larger brand networks here in the US and the US debit networks. I've been in the payments industry for about a decade now, so I feel like I'm pretty well versed on all of the fun stuff that payments has to offer.
Thanks. Sandra?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sandra from Hyatt. I'm based in London, and I'm Director of Global Distribution Strategy and Operations at Hyatt. So my main everyday focus is more about connectivity, our third-party connections and distribution strategy. Therefore, about a year ago, I decided that I really would like to know more about payments and see what is there for us to do. So that's why I joined Mike for the payments pillar.
Thanks. Xavi?
Thanks, Mike. So I'm Xavi Ginesta. I'm the founder and chairman of Voxel, and I'm essentially involved in long-term strategic business development, and that's taken me to become, I don't know if I'm a specialist, but quite well acquainted with the payments industry. Our company's core business is electronic invoicing, but since 5 years ago that I joined HEDNA, and I've been involved with the B2B payments working group. We've been very active in the area of B2B payments. I've been personally involved in the joint development between HEDNA and HTNG of the Open Payment Alliance. And I've actually pushed forward in my company the implementation of the first operational version of the OPA's payment manager. So I can say now I'm really passionate about B2B payments and happy to help make a contribution to this webinar.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, so our objective here, as I said, is to be interactive. So there'll be some questions. There's going to be a lot of talking. Again, if you have questions in the audience, feel free to share them. And just as a question for the general group, like we've spent a lot of time working through topics with HEDNA, both with B2B payments and with guest-centric payments. Do you think we've finally achieved some element of consensus about what the future of payments should look like? Because if the answer is no, then the whole purpose of this call is doomed. But just I throw that out there. Like, what are your thoughts about the importance of guest-centric? And as a hotelier, Sandra, I mean, maybe you can start, and then the rest of us can sort of chime in.
Sure. I think that is especially the last couple of years have highlighted opportunities for us in the industry, and our payments pillars and working groups are really designed around the main topics that we have identified, being as guest-centric payment and B2B payments and third-party compensation as the main opportunities we have. Certainly contactless payment and the enhancement of the guest experience and putting the guest at the center of the arrival process and the payment process has been a need for quite a couple of years. A lot of industries around us have made a great progress, and we are lagging a bit behind. So definitely a lot of opportunities there for us. And Xavi already mentioned the B2B payment options. Again, another important topic that we have so much to catch up on.
Yeah, I mean, Xavi, Sandra references the Open Payment Alliance. I mean, can you give a little background to those who are new to this webinar? I mean, that was probably years of consensus building to get to where we're at now with the Open Payment Alliance.
Do you want me to give like the background of what it is about, or?
I think that would be really good.
Okay, yeah, sure. Essentially, the Open Payment Alliance is something that an idea that emerged within the HEDNA's B2B payments working group. Basically, what we did in that working group was to study what the pain points were in the industry, what things could be improved, what were the problems essentially, or the points of friction with B2B payments. And then we looked at what could be the potential solutions. And what we realized is that the problem essentially came down to the fact that B2B payments were B2B payments were actually executed through a very complex distribution chain, which was not designed for handling payments, really. So all you could do through the distribution channel was to send a VCC or a credit card. But basically, that's what everything came down to at the end of the day. And that didn't give a lot of flexibility to the players. And the problem was that changing that and actually upgrading the distribution channels so that it could actually support sophisticated payment workflows was completely out of the question, right? Ideally, if you look at how a B2B payment, what would be the ideal scenario for an OTA when it needs to pay a hotel? If I was an OTA, I would say, look, I would like to talk to an interface, and that's actually the payment manager, the payment manager concept that came out of the Open Payment Alliance. I would like to talk to an interface, call it the payment manager, and send an instruction to this interface saying, look, I would like to pay this hotel 500 euros for this booking using US dollars. And I would like you to hedge this operation in order to mitigate exposure to currency fluctuations, as there may be a significant time frame between the date of booking and the date of check-in. And in addition, I would like to make this payment using this particular form of payment. It could be a credit card, could be something else. I would also like to get a VAT compliant electronic invoice for fiscal reasons. Maybe I have an agreement with the hotel that entitles me to a 1% early payment, an early payment discount according to certain conditions. So there's a lot of business logic that could be embedded on a B2B payment. And this business logic today is very hard to orchestrate. It's basically orchestrated manually, or in fact, it's just not possible to do this complex set of instructions with just one booking. So the whole idea behind the Open Payment Alliance is to create a framework where these kinds of instructions can happen seamlessly and fully automatically without human intervention, right? Yeah. That's the idea, and that's what we've been working on. As I said before, the backbone of the Open Payment Alliance is this central element called the payment manager, which is essentially the equivalent of a channel manager, and it takes care of receiving payment instructions from the OTAs and orchestrating them through an ecosystem of payment service providers. That's the idea.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that this was a multi-year process. It started with a working group before even the Open Payment Alliance. So we've had between 50 and 100 different companies, whether they be hoteliers or OTAs or PMSs, and all of these different technology companies, GDSs, payment companies, all involved in the process of this. Eric, so Adyen certainly is involved with the B2B payments through issuance and processing of virtual credit cards. But to me, the core benefit or value that Adyen brings to this discussion is the processing of guest-centric payments and really putting the emphasis of payments on where the guest is coming from, not where the property is located. And I guess the question for you is, how important is that? And what about post-COVID life really makes that mindset necessary?
Yeah, I think the one thing that we've come to expect, and will certainly be a trend that's sticking here post-COVID, is just the importance of creating a truly omni-channel experience, right, for your guests. And so by omni-channel, we mean like the ability to have a guest make a reservation online, arrive at the hotel, have some type of method in which that guest can then authenticate upon arrival, and then that transaction can process behind the scenes very seamlessly. And so I think one way, the complications in order to enable that within the hoteling industry is just what Xavi was touching on, is just the complexity of the infrastructure, multiple distribution channels in which these guests are actually making these bookings. And then channel managers and property management systems. And so all of a sudden there's a lot of payment data that's being passed around, and creating an experience where a guest can actually do that seamless experience on check-in that's touchless becomes a whole lot more complicated. And so having one like global platform that can facilitate this with brands that have locations around the globe is just one aspect that can help alleviate a lot of those constraints.
Absolutely, and I think it can sort of tailor payment preferences to guests. The example we've used so many times in Hedna is the example of outbound Chinese guests paying with WeChat Pay or Alipay in hotels outside of China. Sandra, when you hear this discussion about guest centric, and I know you're not the payments lead or even on the payments team at Hyatt, but when you hear about guest centric payments, is there anything that seems amiss about the concept as at least a long-term strategic goal?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is actually becoming a decision maker for the travelers today, how they can maybe bypass a check-in at the front desk, how we can make this experience seamless for them. So I do think that those companies who have a strategy around this and who have a technology to solve for this may certainly have a business advantage for that. So definitely in the conversations of today, I think the challenge is that exactly as Eric mentioned, there are so many players and so many various opportunities that we really need to make sure that we work together as an industry to come with a solution for that. And we have faced challenges in the past for that. So, but it's certainly an interest for all of us, and that's why I'm hoping that we, as Hedna, can move things forward here.
Well, it's funny because one of the questions we get at working with the board is, how are payments really part of distribution? And this I think highlights one of the major topics. It's sort of, if you have a guest coming to your direct booking channel and you don't accommodate their payment preferences, then you actually send them to a third-party distribution opportunity or a partner in order for them to have the opportunity to pay, which it's one of the weird hidden costs of distribution that we haven't really quantified. But back to the example in China, that was sort of the working group that led to the Open Payment Alliance and the Guest Centric Working Group. The premise for starting that working group was actually this redirection from brand.com to third parties because of payment methods as a problem. So with that, Eric, you've got a pretty good understanding of how hotel payments work. You have seen how other industries, other parts of the travel sector work. How bad are we?
Well, comparing it to,
and you don't have to sugarcoat this.
I mean, it's very complex, right? I think there's a couple of things that are, constraining the ability to create this unified commerce or payment experience. First and foremost is just what I touched on earlier, is just the challenge of having multiple distribution channels, right? So direct booking, indirect booking on an OTA, and then this payment data kind of coming into channel managers and property management systems. Fairly complex, not as pervasive in other industries. And then I think the other component is just the legal entity structure for branded hotels, where the actual merchant of record is the hotel owner. Like it just makes it complicated for those specific hotels to actually require the card upon a check-in. And then I think finally, the other interesting piece here within the hotel industry is, like, when you compare it to airlines, customers are paying upfront, right? This whole concept of changing consumer behavior for paying now versus later makes it a little bit more complicated, and also is another component for why hotels are struggling to create this seamless experience and are having guests put their card in when they arrive at the front. So those are just some of the complications that I think that we've been struggling with when we compare it to, say, airlines or even rental cars, where there are some of the pay now options as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are all sorts of legacy decisions that we've made in the hotel industry, which I really find, what is the word, exasperating. Sandra, why doesn't every hotel brand view their brand to be an OTA for their own properties? It would solve all of the payment issues. It would actually provide a lot more data. So the OTAs are doing this prepaid bookings. They're figuring out a way to pay the hotels. You have these agreements in place with OTAs. Why is a hotelbrand.com and brand app just not a glorified OTA with a specified inventory?
And if you expect that I answer the $1 million question to you right now, I will have to disappoint.
Damn.
I do not have the recipe in front of me. However, it's certainly one of the biggest opportunities that we have. It's no secret to anyone that probably everyone is the Derive Direct strategy is in front of us, trying to direct more and more to our own brands, and therefore this is a great opportunity. I think that the commercial teams on the front end working towards this, and the payment teams haven't necessarily worked so closely in the past, that this gives us an opportunity moving forward to look at this together, and certainly something that will be on the table moving forward.
I mean, I just look at airline websites and they sell hotel rooms, they sell insurance, they sell they're an e-commerce hub. It's just something that I really, I guess I'm no longer an industry outsider at this point, but in the past as an industry outsider, I never quite grasped. So Xavi, you work with lots of payment companies, and we're talking about a little bit about guest-centric payments, and we've got this HDNG had no specification for a payment manager. Your company is working with companies like Adyen and their competitors to create this infrastructure for payments that can actually be applied both to B2B and eventually to guest payments. How does a tech company like Voxel help out with this change as we try to implement a more efficient payment structure?
Yeah, I think that obviously here the bottom line is efficiency, right? I think that if the industry is going to move in one direction, is the direction of being every time more and more efficient. Now, because we are in the middle of a pandemic, it's hard to tell what direction the industry is moving in, because the industry is basically trying to survive. But there's no doubt that the industry in the long run is going to be looking for efficiencies. That's going to be the major goal, right? And if you think about it, when you look at things like high processing costs, rebates, breakage, chargebacks, FX fees, late payments, the need for credit insurance, all these are forms of inefficiency and sources of revenue at the same time, right? So it's because the industry is so, payments are handled so inefficiently that there are many opportunities for many different players to leverage those inefficiencies and actually make money out of that. And there are many different payment service providers. They all specialize in solving one specific problem, even within the same area of specialty, like VCC issuers. They all have their own unique selling points. And today it's virtually impossible to find everything you need in one single service provider, right? So if a large hotel chain wants to get the best of the B2B payments or the payments ecosystem in general, it's very hard to find one player that gives you everything you need, which means that you need to end up contracting multiple players, integrating their different solutions, and that's a mess. I think that's what a payment manager, what we're actually building now, that's the best thing that or the great innovation that we are contributing to the industry, right? The fact that with one single connectivity to one central piece of technology, you can actually leverage the best of all worlds in this ecosystem. You can connect to multiple players, and based on every single booking, decide how you're going to orchestrate the payment for that booking, using what partners, what's going to happen exactly at a booking level, right? And as you said before, this originally emerged from the analysis in a specific group, the B2B payments working group. But what we're seeing more and more is that the work being done in other groups, especially in the customer, in the guest-centric payments group, and also in the commission payments, there's basically three fronts that are converging in the same direction. And I think that the foundation we've laid out will eventually be the framework where payments are going to happen in the industry in the long run, not just our original concept of B2B payments, but essentially all B2B payments and potentially even B2C payments.
Yeah, that's really very helpful. And in some ways, it accentuates nicely, the role of a PSP like Adyen, or some of the other HEDNA members like Nuvei and Genico, where Eric, you guys are connecting consumer payments out to the localized payment preference or acquiring channels in country. So it would seem that the payment manager is sort of bringing the data together from the at least the B2B parties, and you guys are actually processing whatever data with the various payment companies around the world, which is inherently more complicated because of the regulations and whatnot.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think, to Xavi's point, efficiency in making payments, much more streamlined within this hotel industry is going to be just paramount for continuing to create that omni-channel experience. And so we have, hundreds of payment methods. And if you're looking to have global expansion and process in that guest native currency, having those different payment methods and creating that optionality for guests to pay in whatever format they want is definitely a value add for your guests. And then I think back to the omni-channel experience of a lot of hotels currently today have different payment processors for e-com or point of sale, and it just creates a little bit of a not a holistic view of your guest, and some constraints there as well. So
I think this is really good information. I think that it sort of moves us to the next section of our discussion, which is so how do we do this? I mean, Sandra, how do we as an industry start the process of actually implementing this future vision? I mean, again, you're getting all the easy questions, so this might be the $1 billion question, not the 1 million from before.
Not the one before. And thanks for your expectations that I have all these answers. I think that that one of the most important things is to create awareness for this opportunity and bring these discussions to our everydays. It's certainly through education and through data that we see better what sort of opportunities that we are dealing with. Usually the commercial discussions are not necessarily centered around payments. And I think this is one of the most important things for the future, that we bring this topic similarly to how we talk about commissions or marketing opportunities when we talk to our partners, our third-party partners. I think that that payments is certainly one of the topics to bring into this conversation, along with some of the opportunities for the guest-centric options that we have discussed, to really how do we share data and how do we work together towards this future.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I know we've talked about this in previous discussions. I mean, part of the first step is, at least on B2B payments, allowing the hotels to have some input into the payment method that they receive. And I think, Xavi, one of the ongoing discussions that we've had as part of the Open Payment Alliance is the historically, the hotels have been left out of the payment process to the point where the hotels have really funded all of the payment processing. You know, it is one of the first steps really for, I mean, obviously this is an important thing for us for what we're working on, but it seems like, you know, the Open Payment Alliance standards are a really good first step as an industry that we should be focusing on.
Yeah, well,
it's a leading question, but I could have asked it.
Right? Yeah, of course. I think that's at least one way of start moving in that direction. I mean, if we don't do anything about it, we can stay like we are now for the next 100 years, right? I think you opened up the webinar asking if there's a consensus about the future of B2B payments. I don't know if there's a consensus about the future, but I know there's a consensus about the absurdity of the present, right? So as long as we want to leave this present behind and we want to move in the direction of efficiency that I was mentioning before, we definitely need to do something different. If you keep doing always the same thing, you will always get the same results. I think it was Einstein, right, that said that. So it's obvious we need to do something. And until now, there were no really any industry. There was no real alternative. There was nothing to do. I mean, everybody was stuck with what they had. There was no initiative whatsoever. And I think the Open Payment Alliance is the first one that actually lays the grounds for, I think it's a great alternative. We're going to see what happens. I can say that, you know, we've taken advantage of the pandemic to innovate and to start building all the building blocks of the payment manager. So we have something in place. We already have like over 20 OTAs that are piloting, these early adopters that are piloting the solution. And it looks like it's working very well. But you never know. This might be the Open Payment Alliance could be just one step more on the way to efficiency. It might not be the final step, but at least this one step. I think that definitely it's a good way to start. And I understand that recommending hotel chains and OTAs to just go ahead and adopt it is not, you know, that sentence is going to resonate differently in different people's minds. You know, it depends on your mindset, right? It's demonstrated that some people are technology enthusiasts and they will jump in when they see a new technology that promises something different than what they have. And that's the kind of people we're targeting right now. The next wave will be the pragmatics, right? Once this technology has been demonstrated, and if in a year from now we can show results that are compelling, that show that using the payment manager actually provides competitive advantage, those that were not technology enthusiasts, but they are pragmatics, will probably follow on, right? They will be like, okay, I don't want to be left behind. So that's going to be the next wave. So I think now we have 1 year ahead of us, especially as we exit the pandemic, that we need to demonstrate that everything that we preached when we were selling the idea of the Open Payment Alliance, now that we have an actual standard and it's been implemented, we have to see if it exactly lives up to the expectations we've created.
It's a great point. And Eric, on the PSP side, so one of the things that I like to recommend to hotels is, as Sandra said, there needs to be an element of education. And one of the recommendations that I make to hoteliers when we talk about payments is really you should identify a handful of PSPs and go through an RFI process, because hotels need information on how this works. So basically, I'm trying to keep your team busier than they should be by having you respond to all sorts of RFIs, but I think that PSP is a payment service provider. So it's basically responding to a question from the audience. It's a sort of a hub for payments, in this context, more consumer based, whereas the payment manager is a hub for ordering that enables a payment. That's a really good differentiation that we should have shared earlier. But for RFIs, what do you think of that as a good first step for a hotel brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a hotel brand that's committed to acknowledging the inefficiencies and seeking to address them, looking at some type of vendor evaluation process, and really making sure that you're looking at a PSP provider that has the industry experience, that lives and breathes payments and can come up with really innovative solutions to address some of these unique challenges within the hotel industry, and has a global reach is kind of some of those key considerations that I would have on my evaluation scorecard. But yeah, I think the RFI process and just starting to understand like what players are out there, and there's probably only a select handful that have really the deep expertise in this vertical that's complex, and kind of just evaluating them from a true capability perspective on how they can address each of these gaps is would make a whole lot of sense from a partnering perspective. I think hotels may have over the years have had the tendency to kind of try to address some of the stuff on their own, whether it was EMB or PCI. And so being able to rely on a payment service provider that can help out in these areas would make a whole lot of sense, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's important as part of any sort of learning experience. There's an old school mindset that everything needs to be done at property, everything needs to be done locally, and there are incredible costs of if you have cross-border guests, there are incredible costs associated with cross-border transactions. And so with an RFI, I think the guest-centric working group would strongly argue that a hotel needs to look not at where their properties are located. So if you have a property in the Dominican Republic, chances are there's a very low percentage of domestic traffic going to that hotel. So it's really understanding where your guests are coming from and identifying payment partners that can address where your guests are coming from, which I think is an important part of the preparation for an RFI. So I want to delve into something that's, I think a very good validation of what we've been talking about. And I want to just discuss an announcement and then move to the generic quickly. And Eric, given your company's Dutch, I'm going to put you on the spot on this one. So recently, Booking.com has raised a lot of interest in the fintech sector by announcing that they are going to set up this separate fintech designed to create efficient hospitality or travel industry payments. I mean, does that, beyond validation of the discussion we're talking about, how does a PSP look at an OTA, sort of moving into this sort of realm?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think, look, it's not surprising to see an OTA wanting to take more ownership of payments. And so I think for the industry, there's multiple ways to look at it. But, if you want to look at it from the angle of, well, if they keep commissions relatively consistent and they're going to continue to handle all of this payment data for hotels, maybe it is like a viable solution to allow them to continue to outsource or to outsource them to handle all of this complexity for payments. However, I think what we've seen, especially within some of the smaller hotels, is that OTAs just have such an immense amount of negotiating power when it comes to their commissions. And so understanding how to still, take some of that direct ownership of payments, becoming more direct bookings is probably something that I would be looking at if I was a hotelier.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to point out that Expedia has probably been one of the largest fintechs in the world over the last 25 years, and they do their own payments, and there's a lot of volume in and out. Sandra, I mean, it seems like the payment outsourcing a payment process to an OTA is potentially interesting, potentially efficient, but it seems that one of the continual, I wouldn't say confrontations, points of disagreement with OTAs and hotels has long been data and individual guest data. I mean, isn't that sort of exacerbated with payment information and payment data potentially?
Yeah, you're absolutely right in that. I think that that as with everything, it has its pros and cons, but we certainly need to make sure that we look at the complex picture anytime when such discussions come up. And indeed, the guest preference, whether they want to pay now when they make a reservation or they would like to pay later, it's important to give the choice for the guest, but certainly it has other consequences as well. As to the guest data, it's becoming very important when we talk about that contactless experience around the arrival or how the guest gets into their room and how the in-hotel or once the stay experience starts, how early can they enjoy some of those benefits that somebody who books direct would certainly have access to. And certainly there are opportunities for us to cover with our with the third-party reservations, where we don't necessarily reach the guest before they actually arrive physically to the hotel.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating how the guest experience plays into this, but you know, I really do think that the recovery from COVID is going to provide us with an opportunity to do things a little bit differently. And as I said, I really think that the discussion about OTAs and payments really is a validation of what we've been speaking about. And you know, I think based on what we're seeing in the guest-centric working group, I think we're going to see a number of larger hotel brands really elevating payment strategies internally. So I think you're going to have quite a few more RFIs to respond to, Eric. So get your team ready. Going back to that sort of how do we implement question, again, a difficult question for you, Sandra.
Great.
Yeah. So, well, maybe not. So the challenge really is you have managed versus franchised hotels, and you have different relationships, and you have different educational requirements. I mean, one of the roles of our guest-centric group is working group is to figure out ways to educate everyone in the process on the impact. So let's say I could justify that for every cross-border booking involving cross-currency, a hotel pays 3% more than it needs to. Let's just say that's a hypothesis that I can demonstrate, with cross-border fees and with currency, multi-currency pricing and things like that, you could get to 3% on all cross-border cross-currency guests. How would we go about as an industry convincing hoteliers of the value of that, and then enabling the hotels to get that information through the internal processes to justify whatever development programs are needed?
I think it will certainly take a little bit of time, similarly to how it happened when we talk about our commission or margin costs. We've come a long way if you compare to where the industry have been like 10, 20 years ago, about getting more reservations versus then focusing on the cost of distribution of actually how we are getting these. And the payments that just you have mentioned is also adding to the cost of distribution. We are very clear when we talk about the front end cost, like the commission and the margins of what the cost is. We haven't necessarily focused and just accepted payments as as a cost that has to come with the reservation. We haven't really thought in deep about whether this is something we can actually influence or not. So I think this is our first role to really to create awareness around the costs, and this is how I would start.
Is there a need to reach out to the hotel ownership groups directly? I mean, it's a little bit more challenging because an ownership group may have 4 or 5 different brands that they're working with. Is that sort of a multi-pronged approach that we need to be taking?
From my side, I think so, because payments, as we have said before, it's much less centralized for big companies as to other commercial approaches. We have a lot of things centralized that a chain would certainly negotiate on behalf of the hotels. Payments hasn't been part of that. So certainly with anything that we are looking to create awareness and change around, is certainly the ownership groups. Eventually the cost is there, it's in their hands, and therefore the need also needs to come from there.
It's sort of interesting. The legacy ownership structure of many of the hotels is the reason we have the systems we have today. And when we're talking about consumer payment data, if you go to an airline, they can tell you what their chargeback rate is, what their fraud rate is, what their auth rate is, what their cost per transaction is, and they can get down to a level of precision that's shocking. Eric, we don't see that in the hotel industry. It seems as though as an industry, we've been focusing on things like PCI or SEA. I mean, how do we get the focus on sort of broader strategic topics for hotels? I mean, as a thought leader, what can Adyen do to facilitate?
Yeah, I think to me, I think a lot of the historical implementations that the industry has had to undertake, we've kind of taken the approach of has to be on property. To your point earlier, Mike, let's look at doing it in-house. And so really looking at providers and relying on them and their payments expertise to your point, like what are the chargeback rates? What's our win rate looking like? What's our auth rates? Like there are plenty of PSPs in the industry that have this expertise that can really help hoteliers think through how to optimize and create efficiencies and really taking more ownership of payments. And so, yeah, I would just be looking for someone that has demonstrated this capability in the past at global scale.
So it's sort of based on that comment and some of the stuff that Xavi said earlier, and looking at our industry's history with things like Channel Manager, I think the key thing here is to know who's out there and to know what companies are available to help. I am actually a huge fan of RFIs as part of, I think an RFP might be a little bit too extreme until you've figured out exactly what you need. But I think RFIs are extremely important at this stage in the education process. I think there are a lot of companies, payment companies, that have expertise with OTAs, airlines, other parts of the travel sector, which have information that can help us educate the folks within hotels and specifically at brand level. I think that the importance of the Open Payment Alliance and the HEDNA HDNG standards needs to be continually stressed within our groups. What other sort of last comments would you have for our viewers as to things that they should focus on for implementing the desired strategic vision for payments? And we'll start with Xavi and then go to Eric and then end with Sandra, because you've taken all the really difficult questions all day, Sandra. So thank you.
Oh, okay. So I think probably one of the things that's most needed right now in the industry is something that nobody has mentioned, But I think we need more Sandras in management positions in the hotel team. People that have a vision, that can understand payments, that can have this full understanding of how important payments are. If you think about it, generating payment efficiencies. You were saying before that you could save up to 3%. I think it could be more, because there's a lot of inefficiencies that have nothing to do with the transactional costs. It has to do with dealing with incidents, breakage and stuff like that. When you add all that up, it could be really much more than that. So if you think about that, and you think that some hotel chains live with margins under 10%, their profitability margin is under 10%, just a 1% savings due to efficiencies that you're generating anywhere else, that percentual point accounts for more than 10% of profitability increase, right? So I think that, until hotel chains develop this mindset that there's a lot to be gained by being efficient on the payment side of their business, it's hard that that we can talk about what they should be doing in terms of moving forward. I think we need people that really understand payments. The fact is that very few hotel chains actually have roles such as global head of payments or something like that, right? Even OTAs, they don't. OTAs, that's a more common position, right? But it's not such a common position either. So I think that it's very important that the industry, that awareness starts to build up in the industry, that people are more and more aware of the importance of B2B payments in general, and create these managing positions. Because unless we have people that are 100% of their time fully devoted to catering to these needs, no matter how many wonderful things we say, nothing is going to happen.
That's a great point. And I think the hotel brands have made some progress over the past 5 years. 5 years ago, there wasn't anyone, I shouldn't say anyone. There were very few that had even payment roles, and I think that's expanded. A little bit of a hiccup with COVID, but I think that's great advice. Eric?
Yeah, I would completely agree with Zavi. I think acknowledgement and starting to build some of that internal expertise with payments is definitely an important component of it. And then I also think just looking at partnering with someone that has the external expertise to help continue to bring innovation and future-proof your payment strategy is going to be important. Look, like the way in which the world is evolving, we've gone through PCI, we've gone through EMV, there's PSD2 in Europe, there's strong customer authentication. These data privacy and continued evolution is only going to continue to increase, in my opinion. And so I think finding a payments partner that is on top of that and is also looking at new ways to enhance the payment experience, whether that's through tokenization as well, is going to be important for hoteliers to consider.
Yeah, I think that to look at this and think, if you've done payments the same way for the past 20 years and you do it that way because it seems to work, maybe it's time to step back and look at things a little bit differently, because a lot has changed in the payment realm in the past 5, 10, 20 years. Sandra, would you like to have the last word today?
I kind of thought that you might have that, and so then I would take the opportunity to pass the question actually to you this time. I was curious.
Nicely done.
I was curious. I'm sure we talked a lot about brands and chains, and we always think about companies like I work for or larger, but I'm sure we have a lot of small to mid-sized chains on the call today as well. Would you have some advice or some suggestions for them, how they might be different, and size is sometimes better if smaller, how they would approach this differently and what advantage they may have?
Yeah, thank you. And that's a great question. I think the comment I just made about, if you've done things the same way for a long time, it's time to go out and assess what else is out there. For smaller chains, I think it's even more imperative that they understand where their guests are coming from and where their desired guests are coming from. So to understand where your market is today is really important. But if you're a European hotel chain and all of your guests are, German and French, and you want to expand to Japanese, American, Latin American guests coming into your hotel, understanding the payment methods associated with those countries are really important. So the first step would be understand your existing market, understand what your target market is, and then it gets a little bit trickier when you're smaller because you tend not to have the global reach of entity structures and whatnot. There are a couple of payment companies that I am familiar with that are geared toward helping regional hotel brands or regional companies with global payments. And so Adyen is in that mix. There are some that go a step further and take merchant of record responsibility. So I would say if you're in that situation and you're listening, first look at how you do things today, who your existing target market is, who your desired target market who you would like it to be, and then find a third party to help with payments in ways that address the guests that you would like to attract to your property. It was an absolute pleasure to answer your questions, Sandra. Next time you can moderate again. I want to thank all of our panelists, and I wanted to just point out that our next Adyen-sponsored webinar is in our webinar series is on the 14th of September at the same time, and we'll be discussing the importance of multi-currency pricing for the hotel industry. So with that, thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Xavi. Thanks to everyone who has participated, and